Good evening, everyone. I'm the Director of Collections for the 30th Anniversary of Expo 88. And my daughter Isabella is up the back recording it. We're going to make this into a YouTube. So if it's similar to the Kookaroo Historical Society, and if you fall asleep during my presentation that my son said was very boring, you can watch it on YouTube. Now, first of all, I need to say a special thanks to Norm, and the person I would really probably owe the greatest thanks to, is a fellow called John Barlow Hudson. And you can see his photo there on the right, reflected in a piece of a cut-off from Morning Star. Now, Morning Star is a beautiful sculpture. If I don't, at Expo 88, remember where all the neon lights were? Right in the centre there was the Spanish Pavilion, and it was sort of the epicentre of Expo 88, because there was lots of restaurants around it, and it was just a really happening scene. Morning Star, that you can just see in the photo there, that was one of two sculptures that John Barlow Hudson produced for Expo 88, and they're called monumental sculptures because of their size. The second one that he produced, called Paradigm, is one of the driving reasons why I've remained engaged, because it is a 100-foot high sculpture. It is made of polished stainless steel. It was the first sculpture in the world designed with the aid of a computer, not designed by a computer, but with the aid of a computer. And it had the first computerized lighting system installed in a sculpture in the world. So it's very unique. And it's sitting in a shed. And it's been sitting in a shed under David Hinchcliffe's watch, who's a passionate artist, as you probably know. And it's been sitting in a shed, and the Lord Mayor has worked out that the only way of spending the $1.5 million on resurrecting it is by making the Expo 88 Art Trail such an important part of Brisbane's tourist narrative that it will just go up in the normal course of things, and there won't be a big hullabaloo over the expenditure, or at least that's the plan. Now, so John Barlow Hudson, this piece of polished stainless steel, when they made Morning Star, there was a whole lot of drops, is what it's called, and this is the last drop that was left over from its production. It's been used, the stainless steel has been used in other pieces that John Barlow Hudson's done. You can see in the middle picture, he's engraved it. That's actually hand engraved. I'm assuming by a little hand engraving machine. And he's written a special message 30 years after the event to the people of Brisbane. And the last photo on the right there shows that particular piece sitting proudly up in the Brisbane Museum. And there are a myriad of people that have been involved in the 30th anniversary. Norm, who's been a constant help to me over the years, as you'll verify. A fellow called John McGregor is the next, as we move from left to right. John, he founded a web page called Foundation Expo 88, and the YouTube will be found under Foundation Expo 88 YouTube channel, which is a bit of a historical anomaly. The lady called Susan Johnson, and she's one of the feature editors of the Courier Mail, and was a feature editor, or feature journalist, in the Sunday Mail, and did a wonderful article on finding all these lost Expo 88 art pieces that the Lord Mayor and I have been sort of ferreting around discovering. And she found one, believe it or not, in her own building at the Courier Mail, down in the basement, and there she is pointing to it. And it's called The American Photographer. And the Courier Mail have now gifted that to the Brisbane City Council to go in for collection. And the pieces we've been able to collect are the Drover and his mate, which the Cross River Rail Authority had possession of at the now currently being demolished Sunmap Centre, and that's been gifted across to the Brisbane City Council. Thank you very much, Jackie Trad, for helping in that particular task. of an anonymous donation called Clown Bending Over Backwards. The American photographer that you can see there, Sad Clown by IBM. And the people of IBM, and I'll show it to you at the end, they also had their first day postage envelope, which is a special tribute that Australia Post did, and they've donated that to the Bulimba Historical Village, which will also feature later on. So the Sad Clown IBM, and currently I'm negotiating with Scout Shawley a collection of the original Art Buster pieces coming back into the possession of the Brisbane City Council. And it's, after 30 odd years, it's really quite amazing to see. Another little item, that's my daughter, some years ago now. See, I knew she'd be here, so I'm going to tease her. This is the, on the left there, this is the only piece of World Expo that is still exactly in its same location, doing exactly the same function that it was doing during World Expo 88, and it hasn't moved one iota, except grow greener. And that's actually has been restored for the 30th anniversary, and I think I put a photo in of that. And there's the Lord Mayor and I. The media have been incredibly helpful. So on the left here is Kat Feeney, who did a really great series of interviews prior to the 30th of April. And they just seem to go on and on and on and on, really, to be honest. She just had an incredible amount of energy and love of Expo 88. And in the photo there is, on the right there, on the right-hand photo, on the right, in the right-hand photo, the fellow taking the photo is the Brisbane Times senior journalist, Tony Moore, a really lovely fellow. Not only is he a journalist, he's actually a musician, I discovered. And he's interviewing the now late Gary Balkin, who passed away not that long ago, who was the owner of the Kookaburra Queen. And Gary was in the process, and that's the reason why we were doing the interview. What he's holding there was the visitors book from Expo 88. It was a visitors book that just covered the period of Expo 88. And he had it open on the page where Mick Jagger had signed the visitors book. And Gary was just so proud of that visitors book. It had about 2,500 signatures in it. I mean, the Kookaburra Queen one was the seafood restaurant at Expo 88, and it was moored permanently, and the visitors book covers that period of time. So it's a really amazing snapshot of the history of Expo 88, and that's now up in the John Oxley Library. And I can't remember whether other bits and pieces of information went up with that or not. I took the visitors book up, but they then contacted Gary after that, and I think they managed to get some other information that he had before he passed away. But the amazing thing is, on the line below where Mick Jagger had signed, the fellow had written, and Gary had never read it before, but Tony picked it up, had written, "I can't believe it. This is the greatest night of my life. I've just sat next to Mick Jagger as he sat and ate kids' sausages and mash for dinner." And that's what he had for dinner, kids' sausages. So that was a really great little story, and an extraordinarily generous donation by Gary. And much love, much missed Queensland. So, some of the history of what has gone on. The top left-hand side there, that collection of Art Buster pieces was sitting in the Queensland, in a rail carriage in Roma Street. And they had gotten there from South Bank. Originally they had been stored in Collins House, and when Collins House was sold to the Emporium crowd, whose the name of the principal, Anthony Johnson, had acquired it, and the collection of pieces had moved across. And of course, South Bank, having gone through so many changes of mode of operation, they thought they were legitimate Expo 88 pieces, but they're not. Stefan, when he was on the board some 15 odd years ago, had convinced John Longhurst, who owned Logan Hyperdome, to donate them when he was redeveloping the food court area. Because when the Logan Hyperdome was originally developed, it was developed in 87, 88, and Longhurst had populated the food court atrium with all these pieces for the kids. So when they climbed up the snakes and ladders and all the other areas, they were climbing up into all these fun art buster pieces. But they were thought to be legitimate Expo 88 pieces, 2 years ago when they were discovered or rediscovered in the bowels of Rome Street. And the Lord Mayor had started to recast these, and then during the hullabaloo of the 30th, it was discovered what was being recast was not actually legitimate Expo 88 ones, but ones that were similar. So they were a cast of about 25 to 30 people who were models who worked on every single art buster pieces, and then a legitimate connection, because these ones were cast at the very same period of time. And as you can see, if you look at the middle picture, that's actually now what is sitting up at Blackbutt, which is the end picture, because that's in their newly restored and relocated town hall at Blackbutt. Because the 30th anniversary, what we've deliberately tried to do is to lead this seed of development for the memory of Expo 88. So we're trying to get going from Blackbutt to Kingaroy, a yearly event, a bike ride going from the Brisbane Valley Rail Trail, which has just been finished, to the Mary Valley Rail Trail, which is in the progress of construction. You can see in the middle picture, down the bottom, that's actually the bronze of the same piece. So you've got the fiberglass original, and it's a reverse mould process. And on the YouTube channel, I've actually recorded the making of one of it so that people can follow it. So here we are, top left-hand side. There is a refurbished Expo 88 rainforest grove. And it's now got two signs. It only ever had one before. It's now got two signs, one out on the street, and there are another two in the process of being restored. On the ground at the bottom is a wonderful piece that you'll see in a second, which is really my favourite restoration project out of all this. It's called Showdown. It's got a beautiful story. And in the top right hand corner is an A from the Kendone Australia sign, because with all the media interest that was being generated by Kat Feeney and the ABC, there was a really amazing byproduct out of it, and that was the saving of these Kendone signs during the project. How's that? Isn't that amazing? Now, that was sitting out at Boondall for 30 odd years, and it's called Showdown. It's by a Tasmanian sculptor, and the basic story behind it was that John Truscott, who was the artistic director of World Expo 88, I mean, he is a man who had Oscar nominations, had Oscars, was a designer out of Hollywood, based in Melbourne, and he'd been hired to come up here as a second choice, and he just took hold of World Expo 88, him and Rick Birch, and they were just two battling giants. And I've spoken to Rick Birch now innumerable times, and I've got a fairly good ego, but he's just a crushing visionary. I mean, he's just an amazing person, and between them they're like battling giants of creativity, and that's the reason why I think World Expo 88 was so successful. As I said, these two towering geniuses battling it out. One visually, so that the landscaping and the sculptures and everything else was all set out in a certain pattern, so that as you walked through it, you turned, you saw something new, you turned, you saw something new, you turned, you saw something new. Your eyes were always alighting on some amazing and fantastic thing. And he had originally had Charles Bartlett, I think his name is, come up with this amazing series of monumental sculptures, and it was like a $15 million build in 1988. Salou and the board said, no, you're not spending that much money on that. So he then alternated to having another series of monumental sculptures. Now, Chris Beardsworth is the fellow's name. From Tasmania, he produced 4 at the most pieces. This is the only piece outside of Tasmania, and it was designed for nighttime, as you can see. And it has just come up so wonderful. Anyway, Sally-Anne acquired all these pieces. It was put out at Boondall as part of the refurbishment of these Commonwealth Games sites for the '96 Australian rights bid. Brisbane had gone to the Olympics to get the '92 Games. We'd failed, and Brisbane, Melbourne and Sydney were battling it out for the '96 Games. We lost, I think we came last. And Sally-Anne had used these pieces to spruce up the Commonwealth Games. And that's where they sat. I mean, they weren't actually acquired for the purpose of remembering Expo '88. They were acquired for a completely different but very worthwhile purpose. But now it's been repurposed. And I'm just come up so well. And you can see there the sign, World Expo '88 Public Art Trail. So we've been very thorough in bringing together the memory. And there's a daytime photo, not really that good. And you can see in the foreground here is one of the street signs. So all the signs now have these street signs with a little bit of the history of it. And on that is another bit of history about the Inukshuk, which is quite close by. And so that is the 30th anniversary of Expo '88, and I've just